I am here today with Congresswoman Jayapal, the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee, who is holding shadow hearings to address human rights violations with the Trump administration's current deportation plan. Why are we having to have shadow hearings about this?
We have to have shadow hearings because the majority party, the Republicans, will not hold a hearing where they bring in witnesses to talk about how masked men are disappearing and kidnapping people off our streets. So I decided as the top Democrat on the Immigration Subcommittee that we will hold a series of shadow hearings. This is our third one today. We bring in witnesses who can talk about what this means for their families, what it means for their community. We bring in economists. We bring in, today we had somebody from the National Guard. We bring in immigration experts, and at the end of the day, we want people to understand this is not who we are as a country. And this harsh immigration enforcement policy is tearing apart our families, and it is bad for America. And if they can kidnap and detain and deport an immigrant just because they're speaking Spanish, just because they gather on a certain corner, somebody with a legal visa, they can do it to a U.S. citizen, and they are. So today we brought in a couple of U.S. citizens who have seen their family members taken and are left with their children and no parent. It was heartbreaking.
Well, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee, where Mrs. White is, where Mrs. White is from, and her husband was taken, abducted, disappeared from a traffic stop. But they were also, when the ICE raids were happening, they were waiting at school bus stops to snatch and interrogate children without their parents. And we heard about a group of children today who were taken from their parents and their grandmother at a picnic. Interrogated without their mother present. They were not allowed representation. And now they are living with someone else because they are U.S. citizen children. And you proposed an act to help reform how children are treated in immigration and in detention in these settings. Right now we're seeing them not get medical care, not get food, not get to their parents. What would the reform that you've proposed protect children? How would that change the protection for children in this situation?
Well, I mean, really what we're saying is there have to be minimum standards. You can't just pick up kids. You can't separate them from their families. You have to be able to provide attorneys for children. But it has to be real due process. I went to the kids court. It's called the kids court in Seattle. And it's an immigration court for children who have been separated from their parents. So these kids, the youngest one was 4 years old. 4 years old in a courtroom, and imagine the judge.
Without their parents?
Without their parents. These are unaccompanied kids. And imagine the judge saying, I'm going to read you your rights. You have the right to represent yourself. You have the right to ask any questions. You have the right to challenge the charges against you. This is a 4-year-old who's got his head on the side of the bench with a big teddy bear in his arms. And so this is, I think a lot of people in America don't understand that the immigration system is not a criminal system. It is a civil
It's a civil system.
And 90% of the people that go through the immigration system do not have an attorney. So they're pro se. They have to represent themselves. And then we put them into what we call detention facilities. They're supposed to be civil, but they're jails. We incarcerate people. And with the big bad betrayal bill that the Republicans passed, we put so much, big bad betrayal bill. We put so much money into ICE that there's going to be 1,000 new ICE enforcement agents, and ICE is now, with this amount of money, is now bigger than the Bureau of Prisons.
Oh my God. Dr. Gupta, Ms. Gupta, showed us that they have moved 20% of FBI agents over to enforcement now. And I read that those agents specifically came from the domestic terrorism units and the child abuse cases.
Well, that's right, because we had Kash Patel in front of us in the Judiciary Committee yesterday, and this is one of the big things. The FBI is being taken away from its focus on counterterrorism, on many of these other things that they're supposed to be doing, and instead 20% of the agents have been moved over to immigration. And by the way, this is happening in other agencies too. They're just taking from other agencies and making those people.
She said 80% of ATF? Staggering number. Staggering number.
And here's the thing, we won't actually know the consequences of that for some time, because we've spoken to some FBI agents and former FBI agents, and much of their work is also classified, so they can't tell
Can't
you
tell
how
you.
many agents they have, right? And
Yeah.
how many, where did those agents get pulled to? They can't tell you all of that. So what's going to happen is we're going to have these situations where people are not doing what they are supposed to be doing because they're working on immigration, and it is going to make everyone less safe.
And the Trump administration has made it abundantly clear that this is not about legal or illegal. They're taking people from their immigration hearings. They're taking legal residents, legal refugees, U.S. citizens. So if it's not about legality, what is the recourse that we have to put any kind of stop to this? Now the Supreme Court has ruled that you can racially profile. What are any next steps, any preventative steps, both as a congressperson and as an average citizen, to be able to be a barrier to what I consider to be extremely illegal action?
It is extremely illegal action, and I think what we really need is for people to call their member of Congress, particularly if you live in a Republican district, but I would say in any district, because there are even some people in my own party who are nervous to get into this issue because they think it's controversial, when actually immigration, Americans support immigration. They do want a process that is
that
orderly
makes sense
and fair and has legal pathways for people to come. And I think part of it is that's sort of what Trump was saying he was going to do during the campaign, but he lied. He lied. He's not going after the worst of the worst. He said he was going to go after the, quote, the worst of the worst. He was going to go after people who were security threats. That's not who he's going after. The vast majority of people that have been picked up have zero criminal conviction. Zero. And many of them have been here for 20 years, 25 years, working.
Fathers of veterans or veterans themselves.
Or veterans themselves, exactly. People who keep propping up their economies. People who have U.S. citizen spouses, U.S. citizen children. We have U.S. citizen children who don't have parents because of what Trump is doing. And so I really do think that the way the courts, unfortunately, the lower courts are sometimes ruling with us, but then the Supreme Court is starting to consolidate power and centralize power and overturn lower court rulings, sometimes with just one sentence, not even with a decision that's explained. And so we're going to keep working in the courts, we're going to keep pushing in Congress, but in order to get anything done in Congress, we need a couple of Republicans to come with us, which means that we need people to call your member of Congress and say, this is not who we are as a country. We actually are a pro-immigrant country. We all came from somewhere, and unless you're Native American, and you know, and this is important to our identity. And then I also think at the end of the day, it's really about people stepping up. I mean, you saw here, these are community members who stepped up in one case to defend Chelsea White and make sure, you know, try and argue her case in court, and help her with her family when she's a U.S. citizen and her husband was profiled and tricked into signing a deportation order. Now they've got their kids.
They have to move to Mexico
US
now to be together.
Kids, and now they had to move to Mexico. Or even Mimi, who, you know, is basically looking after somebody else's kids because she was detained and deported. And so I think that this is really important, that people recognize that you can do a lot in your own community, right? You can step up and you can help protect people from ICE raids. You can make sure, if you own a business, you can make sure you don't have to let ICE onto your property.
Not without a judicial warrant. They don't have to do.
Look at that warrant really carefully. That was another thing that came out today. So there's so many ways that people can help, and we're actually going to do one of my resistance lab trainings on immigration specifically and how people can get engaged, and that's coming up on October 19th. You can go to resistancelab.us.
So the 3 children that are, or 4 children, excuse me, that are being taken care of
Yeah.
while their parents and their grandmother, who was a legal visitor from Honduras, is being held, not allowed to return to Honduras.
Yeah.
The GEO group is making over $800 a day on imprisoning her.
Yes.
Pam Bondi used to be a lobbyist for the GEO group. So how is the Trump administration and Republicans justifying such a glaring conflict of interest?
There are massive conflicts of interest, and it's not just Pam Bondi, it's also Tom Homan. If you go through all the top people within DHS, they are all people who used to work for or be lobbyists for the GEO group. The GEO group, these are all private for-profit companies that are doing the incarceration of immigrants, and they are making enormous amounts of money, enormous amounts of profits. They donated, if you follow the money.
Always follow the money.
Always follow the money, right?
Yeah.
They donated enormous amounts of money to the Trump campaign, and now they are getting enormous amounts of money to incarcerate people just for one night. What they charge is enormous magnitudes more than if you were to just release, because most immigrants are just being held on bond, right? They're just waiting for a bond hearing, and so they don't need to be in a detention center before Trump came along. Now what they're trying to do is pour profits into these private for-profit detention companies, and by the way, the more they make, follow the money, the more they give to the Trump campaign, which is what they've been doing.
And he's been giving 5% of his proceeds to J.D. Vance's upcoming movements. And the GEO group is also building it's going to be the largest detention center in Georgia.
That's right. And GEO, I mean, the other thing to know is that even though we have standards for detention centers that are supposed to be upheld, these private for-profit contractors don't do that at all. That's why I have a bill called the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act that I've introduced every year since I've been here, and I'm getting ready to introduce it again. It actually gets rid of for-profit private detention centers, because we can have these as government facilities and we can use alternatives to detention, which are way more effective and cost taxpayers a lot less money.
It's amazing how that works. It's
It
funny
is,
how
right?
the claim is that, you know, the left and Democrats are so woke and so emotional, but the numbers just make
The
sense. I'm a
numbers
data
make
girl, and
sense.
I'm a former Christian nationalist. So
Yeah.
I was raised very alt-right. I grew up in Christian nationalism, and it doesn't make sense when you actually look at it. The numbers don't make sense. The morals don't make
Right.
sense. And so what we're going to do after this interview is we're now going to show some highlights from the shadow hearing, so you know what's going on in immigration in the United States.